Well, the sussy dude is finally out. Oberon has come out on the JP version of the game, and he's pretty good. He's built a little weird, but he has some very solid uses. Although I think he's going to be getting overshadowed by Tamamovich just a little bit, because Tamamovich comes out and she allows Buster looping. And then Oberon comes out, and he's kind of a support, but also like a main DPS at the same time. So we're going to talk about him in today's video and whether or not you should be summoning for him or you should be saving for him if you're an NA player. But if you enjoy FGO videos, I upload these videos every single day, and all I ask for in return is a like on the video and a subscribe to the channel. But if you're feeling extra feisty, you can click that join button and become a channel member if you really like what I do. But let's just go ahead and dive right into this, starting off with his hits, which one of the first things you'll probably notice is that he has some weird class icon. You might be saying, what the heck is that? Well, that is the new Pretender class. It's basically the alter ego class, but flipped. So he's super effective against knights, does half damage to cavalry, but for some reason is also weak to foreigners. So, you know, wrap your head around that one. The class itself, I mean, it's going to be somewhat nice for like mixed nodes where there's like lancers and sabers and all that good stuff. But if there's ever going to be a boss fight where the main person is a saber and then he's got like a bunch of riders with him, it could get a little annoying for Oberon, but he does so much damage, or he can do so much damage, that you might be able to get around some of those obstacles, like when it comes to his type advantage and whatnot. But when looking at his actual hits, I mean, he's got a pretty good star gen stat of 20.5% with 2 quick cards with 4 hits on them, meaning he can actually gen a pretty decent amount of stars. Like, he can actually be a main star gen servant, especially in conjunction with his second skill. The only unfortunate thing is that he has a 0.5 NP charge per attack with only 1 arts card with 3 hits on it. I don't really feel like that's going to be enough to help him get his NP, unless you're using all of his skills on himself, in which case you should be fine. But if you're not using them on himself, then he might struggle just a little bit, because even with a crit on that 1 arts card, like relying on just that, you may struggle to refund your NP and fire subsequent NPs after firing your first one. Although that might be the entire point of Obron, is to just obliterate somebody and then never have to worry about them ever again. I would also like to point out that he's packing a 6-hit extra attack, which is insanely good. It's going to round out his Brave Chains to make them super powerful. Because if you didn't know, that extra attack is buffing his NP gain, his crit star gen, and it's giving him extra damage. And now with app-end skills, you can buff its effectiveness by 50% to just gen even more NP and even more stars and do even more damage, which actually might help him out a lot, seeing as his NP gain stat is actually quite low. Or maybe just too average. But enough about the hits, let's talk about his skills. Let's talk about the real meat and potatoes for this servant. So, his first skill is basically his charisma. He's giving the entire party 30% NP damage for 3 turns, and then charging their battery by 20% on a 5-turn cooldown. So, uptime for the skill, obviously very good. You get the effects for 3 turns, and then they're down for 2. It's a 30% NP damage buff for free for the entire party. Seeing as not a whole lot of servants have massive NP damage buffs for themselves, like usually it's a card damage buff and then like an attack buff, this is going to be very good because NP damage buffs multiply into card buffs, which multiply into attack buffs, right? So having different buff types will give you more damage overall. And the fact that he's giving you such a beefy amount of NP damage for free makes this a very powerful charisma. But it actually gets even better when we get to his third skill, which we'll talk about in a little bit, because his third skill makes this first skill just infinitely better. But even outside of the NP damage, the fact that he charges the entire party's NP by 20% is still rather insane. That's always going to be a very good effect. But then jumping over to skill 2, he has a targetable 50% battery, kind of like Scotty, but they tacked extra effects to it. So how this works is you give them a 50% battery, and then the next turn they lose 20% of their current battery. So this really isn't going to matter on, say, Buster servants, because they're really not looping or anything. Or it might matter if you did like a Buster Brave Chain, and you're like, oh yeah, I got like my arts card and I crit and I refunded like 40% NP. Then at that point, Obron's going to suck 20% of that away. But it doesn't even go back to him. It just gets reduced by 20%, unfortunately. I think that would have been really cool if Obron just sucked 20% back at the end of the turn. But as some condolence, he does drop 20 stars as well, all on a 6-turn cooldown. Which, this is why I was saying, like, he can become a really good star gen, especially with his second skill, because his quick cards aren't bad, and his crit star generation stat is actually pretty high. and then he can drop 20 stars. And then that's also why I was saying that maybe that's why he only has the one arts card and the NP gain isn't super high, because he's not only giving 20% to everybody for free, but he has a targetable battery that he can use on himself. Which, do remember that since it's on a 6-turn cooldown and it is a 50% battery, he is compatible with Koyanskaya, so do keep that in mind. But here it is, the Big Mac Daddy skill, skill 3. This is the one that we've been kind of waiting for a fat minute. We've been like, what is his third skill going to be? I was really hoping it was going to have Pierce Invincibility to get around his weird NP, or something just along those lines. But no, what it turns out to be is this crazy Bible chapter of a skill. So what he's doing is buffing one ally's buster performance by 50% for 1 turn. So already pretty good, giving them a pretty sizable buster buff. But then, right under that, he's buffing their NP damage by 100% for 1 turn, which is stupid. That is stupid, dummy good. I don't know who at Delightworks was like, yeah, this is okay. Because essentially, if you have his first skill up and you give this to somebody, they're effectively getting 130% NP damage up. And if you give this to Oberon himself, he hits really hard. Just letting you guys know that right now as well. So he can either make himself hit really hard, or he can make somebody else hit like an absolute freight train. But then this is where things start to get really weird. Because the turn after you do your big mega damage, your servant goes night-night, they lose their buffs, they get a taunt slapped on them for 3 turns, and they cannot be swapped out because he seals their order change, so you can't like plug suit him out or anything. So basically, whoever you slap this on, you better hope that they kill whoever they're fighting in that turn. If you're using Obron to farm with Vich, make sure you use this on the absolute last turn to clear the wave 3, because otherwise he's just going to be sitting around going night-night for the rest of the battle. And I mean, honestly, that's a pretty good skill to have given him. It's a very solid trade-off. They also give the taunt on them, so that way they're not just sitting there going night-night and just hogging up space. And they at least had the foresight to make it 3 turns. So I could definitely see some kind of team comps where you're like cycling out damage dealers with Obron. I could definitely see that being a thing. Because you bring in one Buster Servant, you have them just absolutely annihilate something. You slap this on them, they break a couple HP bars, or they clear a wave, and then they just die off, right? Or they have like the taunt on them, which does give you some defensive utility as well. Do keep that in mind, that if you're in a challenge quest, that also does give you at least 3 turns of knowing where the boss is going to attack. So that is also pretty good. And because he removes all of their buffs, they should die off, because they won't have any defense, they won't have any invincibility, dodge, none of that stuff. So I could see some interesting strategies come out of that, and like how people are going to use Oberon with this 3rd skill. Although I definitely foresee people just using him with Tamamovich to do big heavy damage when he farms, because let's look at his NP. His NP, aside from all the weird stuff it's doing, right, where it's removing their offensive buffs, then making them go night-night for a turn, but then also giving them invincibility for a turn. Ignore all that, you know, that's some whack stuff. If you're farming with Oberon, you don't really care. As long as you kill them, the invincibility doesn't matter. But if you look at the bottom, he's getting a 150% to 200% extra damage against lawful servants. And considering that he's a pretender class, that means any of these lawful servants that are, you know, sabers, archers, lancers, like any of the main knights, he gets super effective damage against, or even the berserkers, so like, you know, the Arjuna altars and all those other people. He gets extra damage against them, which is really crazy. And even without his 3rd skill active, if you're fighting a lawful opponent, he's going to be doing insane amounts of damage. That being said, I was really hoping his 3rd skill would have Pierce Invincibility for longer fights, so that Oberon could use his NP and then give the Pierce Invincibility to somebody else and then have a subsequent NP finish the job. But I guess if you really do get annoyed by this, you could just subvert it by bringing somebody with Pierce Invincibility. Or hey, maybe just use him with Shiro Amakusa, where he just yeets everybody's buffs when he pops his NP. You go with Oberon, you go with Amakusa, and then bada boom, bada bing, you did a lot of damage. I would also like to just go ahead and mention that he has an insane amount of passives as well. Like, he is immune to mental debuff, so he cannot go night-night, you can't charm him, you can't stun him, you can't make him go into, like, eternal sleep, all that good stuff. He's also immune to curses, which is pretty nice. I mean, for those bosses that just slam curses on you, that's pretty cool. He has a buff to debuff success rate and a buff to his quick cards by 10%, meaning those quick cards that are already pretty good, with the 20% star gen with the 4 hits are going to be even better because they have a passive 10% buff because of his riding skill. And then he has this really odd first skill that I'm kind of being vague about because I don't want to spoil too much for people that don't want to know anything about Lost Belt 6, or they don't want to know why Obron's a pretender class. I'm trying to dance around the actual like story implications and everything. So basically, he's going to be buffing the debuff success rate of the entire party except for foreigners. And then if Merlin is on the field, he's reducing his buff success rate by 20%. So basically, don't use Merlin with Oberon. They don't want you guys pairing these two together, because then Oberon's going to start just like smacking down all the buffs Merlin's trying to put on people, which could get really annoying. But on that note, is Oberon worth summoning for? I mean, he does an insane amount of damage. He can really hit very, very hard. And then with his first skill, he has a very powerful charisma. His second skill, he has a targetable 50% battery that also makes him compatible with Koyanskaya. And then his third skill, I mean, he's going to allow one person to hit really, really hard. And then also essentially protect himself for the next 3 turns because they're going to be taunted. And that means Oberon and your main caster who's with him, I'm assuming, or other DPS servant, whoever else is with Oberon, they're going to be safe. And then his NP has a very solid damage mod against lawful servants, considering he's a pretender class and he has type advantage against all of the knights and berserkers on that list. You can actually make a lot of use out of that special damage mod. He removes their offensive buffs, which I really don't see that being all that useful. Slapping them with invincibility can get annoying, but I think the actual strategy would just be like, oh, use a CE with Pierce Invincibility built into it, or just bring another servant that either removes buffs or has their own method of piercing invincibility. He's definitely very good, and he's going to allow for very niche, like, big damage turns that you're going to see all over the place. Like, I've already seen as soon as I woke up this morning, people were just, like, slapping down these, like, 10 million damage turns they did with Obron, like, supporting somebody. I would like to mention that the NP damage buff that he gives on his third skill does not stack. I should probably mention that before someone's like, double Oberon with third skill, we destroy everything. It's like, no. They had at least that much foresight where they do not allow you to use double Oberon to double buff people with his third skill. But even still, he's still capable of giving them a lot of damage. He himself is compatible with Koyanskaya. I honestly couldn't tell people to not summon on the banner, because if you just pulled Koyanskaya, he's going to be a very good servant to have for buster looping. Especially, again, when you consider his class, where you can bring him to a lot of those weird mixed nodes. Now, he's going to get a little slowed down by mixed nodes that might have, like, riders, casters, or something in them. But, you know, hopefully you get lucky, and that's, like, wave 1. That's something that he can kill pretty easily just because they have low HP or something. But he's definitely good enough to summon for. Now, do keep in mind, Koyanskaya's banner is still going to be out for, like, the next 4 days. And I would definitely recommend going for Koyanskaya until you get her. And then if you get Koyanskaya and you still have quartz remaining, or you still want Oberon, then you can still definitely go summon on his banner. Keep in mind that Barghest and Babath Sith are on Oberon's banner as well, and they are both very phenomenal servants as well. So his banner is looking really, really enticing. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. It has been ya boy, who is now going to go back to bed or something because I am exhausted. But you guys have yourselves a nice day. Peace, late guys.